This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
We gaze into the crystal ball to lay out the top 25 things we think will and won't happen as we continue to preview the 2019 college football season on this, the Season 3 premiere of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Arbor back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, and welcome to the Season 3 premiere of Michigan Podcast. I'm Steve Deace, and they said we wouldn't last this long, but here we are with Season number 3 of MP, and we begin Season 3 by continuing our preview of the college football season, which, folks, is only about 40-some-odd days away. Big Ten Football Media Days, we're taping this on Tuesday, July 9th. Big Ten Football Media Days are 8 days away, just 8 days away. Now, if you missed the first two parts of our college football preview, those were some of our off-season episodes. You'll find them right here on this YouTube channel, or if you're listening via podcast on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, etc., it should be on your podcasting page as well. Our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA Ann Arbor and Wolverine Digest will be joining us later in the episode to tell me why the predictions you're about to see are either prophetic or cray-cray. But each year in my college football preview, I lay out 25 bold-ass predictions, things that I think will or won't happen this coming season. I call it my crystal ball, and that's going to be the focus here of our Season 3 premiere and Part 3 of our college football preview. Part 4 will be next week when we give you all of our detailed predictions for the Wolverines and the rest of the greatest sport in the land. But for now, we begin with the crystal ball. Number 1. With it seemingly a foregone conclusion that it's Alabama, Clemson, and everybody else, I think college football's 150th commemorative year will deliver plenty of surprises, including multiple upsets on conference championship weekend that shake up the playoff race. In the playoff era, we really haven't had that college playoff or that college championship weekend upset like a Kansas State beating Oklahoma, for example. We haven't had one of those in the playoff era, but I think we're way overdue. And I think we're going to get a couple of them this year. Like just one kind of example. Say Oklahoma has one loss and wins the Big 12 and plays 3-loss Texas at Jerry World and then loses to them. That kind of championship weekend craziness. I think we're in store for that here in year 5 of the playoff era, year 6 of the playoff era, because we're way overdue. Number 2, Alabama Clemson will not repeat. They will not meet in the national championship game. And before you think that's nuts, remember, just 2 years ago, they didn't meet the championship game. They met in the national semifinals. Number 3 in my crystal ball, for the first time, I believe a 2-loss team will make the college football playoff. In fact, I think multiple 2-loss teams will be in contention for the final playoff spot. I know there's this stigma out there that if you get 2 losses, you can't get in, but it's not really true. It is true we haven't had a 2-loss team yet, but we've been very close a couple of times. In 2017, Auburn had 2 losses heading in to championship weekend playing Georgia. Had Auburn was ranked number 2 in the college football playoff rankings after beating Georgia and Alabama back-to-back in the 2 weeks prior. Had Auburn won that game, they would have been in the college football playoff with 2 losses. And then you go back to 2016, the 3 teams that were vying for the final spot in the playoff were 1-loss Pac-12 champion Washington, 2-loss Big Ten champion Penn State, and 2-loss Big Ten fellow Big Ten contender Michigan. All right, so we have been close to 2-loss teams. Ohio State almost got in with 2 losses back in 2017 as well, before Alabama got the nod over them. So we have been close. And this year, when you look at how much balance is in a lot of these conferences, I think this is the year. I mean, aside from Clemson and Alabama, Clemson especially, I think this is the year we get a 2-loss team into the playoff. Number 4, Nick Saban will finally lose a game to a former assistant coach this year. He plays both Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, and I think Kirby Smart of Georgia beats him in the SEC championship game. And for the first time, a former assistant coach beats Nick Saban. The Padawan beats the master. Number 5. After losing 4 games in a season only once between 1969 and 2001, I believe Nebraska will lose at least 4 games for the 16th straight season. I think they will be better. I think Phil Steele's prediction of them in the Rose Bowl is a little over the top. All right. I think there's still a recruiting class away in terms of depth, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. And they're one Adrian Martinez injury away from being primordial ooze on offense, because he's basically the whole team over there. I think they will be better. The schedule's friendly. I could see them going 8-4-ish, but that would still be a 16th straight season with 4 losses or more by Nebraska. For those of us that grew up the latter stages of the Bob Devaney, Tom Osborne era, that's just a shocking stat. Next in our crystal ball, number 6, Minnesota will end one of the 3 longest championship droughts in major college football when it wins the Big Ten West. Minnesota, Iowa State, and Vanderbilt had the 3 longest conference championship title droughts in all of the sport. And I think the Gophers, who finished strong, are recruiting well, and they have a very favorable schedule in the Big Ten West. I think Minnesota wins a wide open Big Ten West and heads to Indianapolis to end one of the 3 longest title droughts in the sport. Number 7, Mark D'Antonio will retire from Michigan State at the end of the season, and the school will name his former defensive coordinator, Pittsburgh coach Pat Narduzzi, as his replacement. If you look at how recruiting has fallen off for Michigan State, and then you look at this last offseason, I think that was a clue. The reshuffling of the actual of the same staff, rather than bringing in new blood. You don't bring in any new blood when you're not thinking 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And I think they have a team that they'll be better this year. I love their defensive front 7. I think the offense can't be as bad and can't be as injured as it was a year ago. I think you'll see Mark D'Antonio and Michigan State try to make one more run this season, and then I think you're going to see him retire. And hey, I'm a Michigan fan, not a Mark D'Antonio fan, but I recognize excellence when I see it. Surefire college football Hall of Famer. Number 8, Clay Helton will survive at USC mainly because I can't see Urban Meyer having any interest in that university until it figures out its administration, whether it's the admissions scandal. Now you've got a former football assistant coach suing the university, saying that he reported NCAA violations and they fired him for it. You know, Urban Meyer doesn't like a lot of drama. He likes to be in control. And I could see him waiting until a USC gets its act together, or maybe a Florida State fires Willie Taggart before getting back in the coaching arena. Plus, I think USC will be better. Number 9, after losing 4 games or more for the 11th time in the last 13 years, can you believe Auburn? Can you believe Auburn 10 of the last 12 years has lost 4 games or more, but they have? I believe they will do it again this year, an 11th time in 13 years. And then Auburn will fire Gus Malzahn after the season and will hire Liberty's Hugh Freeze as its next head coach for the one thing Freeze has proven he knows how to do, is beat Nick Saban and Alabama, beat him back-to-back years. And remember, one of the predictions in my crystal ball last year that we aired right here on the channel that I got right is when I predicted that either Art Briles or Hugh Freeze will be back as a college head coach. And I was right about that. Hugh Freeze is the coach at Liberty, and I think he'll soon be the next football coach at Auburn. Number 10. 2 teams from the SEC will make the college football playoff for the second time in 3 years. I'm looking at you, Alabama and Georgia. Number 11. This will be the last season played under the current college football playoff format. The field will be expanded and or the selection process altered in 2020. First of all, we don't have a playoff. We have an invitational. There is, for a playoff to occur, there must be a way for you to play your way in. You cannot play your way into this. So it's an invitational. And it's a highly subjective one with lots of contradictory logic and lots of reverse engineering happening in order to justify the outcome that we want. And when you throw in all of the money at stake and how lucrative this process is, I think people are going to say, hey, we need to have a lot more transparency here. Number 12, this will be Mike Gundy's final season at his alma mater, Oklahoma State, one way or another. I just look at the relationship between him and the AD. Him and T. Boone Pickens have been estranged. Last year, they went 7-5. This year, their win total is 6.5. Sometimes, you know, when you're at a program like Oklahoma State and you've won as much as Mike Gundy has, folks are like, well, how do we get to the next level? Because they don't want to admit you just went to your next level. This is your next level. You were there. Did you miss it? And sometimes you become a victim of your own success. I think that's about to happen to Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State. Number 13, Texas A&M plays Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia this season. 2 of them on the road, by the way. Ouch. Ouch, babe. But I think the Aggies will win at least one of those games. And I'm looking at you in a certain non-conference game. I'll have that here coming up as a prediction a little bit later on. Number 14, Iowa will announce offensive coordinator Brian Ferentz, the head coach's son, as its head coach in waiting whenever his father, Kirk Ferentz, decides to retire. If you know anything about the AD over there at Iowa, he loves not having to take any chances, except with his own reputation, apparently. So I could see a Ferentz grandkid, great-grandkid, unborn zygote, just a line of succession here, like a coat of arms with a tiger hawk and the Ferentz family crest. Number 15, Jim Harbaugh finally defeats Ohio State. Number 16, Lovie Smith will resign from Illinois. I just can't see him waiting to be fired. Just seems like too honorable a guy. And the school will replace him with Cincinnati's Luke Fickell, the former Buckeye. Prediction number 17 in this year's crystal ball. I think Missouri will win its appeal, and the NCAA will rescind its bowl ban for the season. In case you missed it, Missouri was given a bowl ban for reporting a rogue tutor doing work for other students. Meanwhile, college basketball coaches going to prison. Crickets. I think the NCAA will rescind that ridiculous bowl ban for Missouri. Number 18, the Heisman Trophy finalists will be in alphabetical order. Jake Fromm at Georgia, Trevor Lawrence at Clemson, Shea Patterson at Michigan, and Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama, all quarterbacks. I think those will be your 4 finalists heading to the Downtown Athletic Club in New York City the second weekend in December. Which brings us to number 19. I think Alabama's Tua Tagovailoa will win the Heisman Trophy this year. Number 20. These are the results of the top 5 early non-conference games, what I think they will be. I think Oregon will beat Auburn They've got a huge quarterback advantage here with maybe the number 1 pick overall in next year's draft, going up against a freshman, a redshirt freshman making his first start. And I also think Oregon has the offensive line to match up with Auburn's terrific defensive front. I like LSU over Texas. I think the Tigers escape Austin in this highly anticipated matchup by taking advantage of that young Texas defense still getting its feet wet early in the year. Now, I foreshadowed this earlier. I like Texas A&M to go into Death Valley and give Clemson its only loss of the season. Remember, the Aggies went toe-to-toe with the national champs a year ago, but lost, and now I think they get their revenge. I like Georgia over Notre Dame between the hedges. The previous clash, this was a primetime classic in South Bend 2 years ago. It was Jake Fromm's first start, kind of his debutante ball, if you will. The rematch, I think, will be his Heisman showcase. And then the Week 0 game, 2019's Kickoff Classic, the first game of the 150th year of college football, renews the in-state rivalry between Florida and Miami. But I think Dan Mullen just has more of an established program as a more experienced head coach than Manny Diaz and a year head start. Maybe if these teams played same location, the Citrus Bowl in Orlando, a few weeks later, I'd give Miami more of a chance. But I think Florida being more established as a program in that season opening environment gets the win over the U. Prediction 21. Iowa, Syracuse, and Wisconsin will begin the season ranked in the top 25, but none of the 3 will finish there. Number 22. On the other hand, Minnesota, Missouri, and USC won't be ranked in the preseason top 25, but will finish there. Number 23. The following first-year coaches will lead their teams to bowl games this season. Gary Anderson back at Utah State, Rod Carey at Temple, Ryan Day with Ohio State, Manny Diaz at Miami, Eli Drinkwitz, maybe my favorite name of the new coaching carousel at Appalachian State, Thomas Hammock at Northern Illinois, Dana Holgerson, who left West Virginia for Houston, and Chris Kleiman at Kansas State. I think those first-year coaches will take their teams to the postseason in year 1. Number 24, liquidate on these teams that I believe will win at least 2 fewer games than they did last regular season. So Buffalo 110, Central Florida 112, Florida International 7, Fresno State 10, Kentucky 9, Middle Tennessee 8, Utah State 11, Washington State 10, and West Virginia 9. I think all of those schools will win at least 2 fewer games in the regular season in 2019. On the other hand, invest in these teams that will win at least 2 more games than they won the last regular season. Baylor won 6, Florida State won 5, Minnesota won 6, Navy 3, Nebraska 4, North Carolina 2, Oregon 8, Rutgers 1, TCU 6, Tennessee 5, USC 5, UCLA 3, Western Kentucky 3, and Western Michigan 6. I think all of those teams will win at least 2 more games this fall than they did in 2018. Well, now we find out just how prophetic or crazy some of these predictions are. We get a second opinion from our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and my partner at Wolverine Digest next. Now that football season is here, it's a great time to support Michigan Podcast via Patreon. We'd love to get over 100 patrons on Patreon by the time the season kicks off on August the 31st. And there's 3 ways that you can support us on Patreon. If you pledge $1 a month, that's just a great way, if you like our content, just to say thank you for putting this together for you all across the maize and blue landscape all year long. If you are in our exclusive club for $5 or more per month, then you get exclusive content. Like you can see, I recently posted my bestest bets for the college football season win totals in 2019. We will also have exclusive instant reaction podcast after games and other content that we set aside, like my point spread picks and others that we do for those of you that are supporting us at $5 a month. And then if you'd like to join our booster club, that's $25 or more a month. You also get your name and business mentioned in the credits, a shout out in the show as well. So a way to promote any message that you have, with some standards around here, obviously, or a business that you'd like us to promote for you as well, for just being a booster for $25 or more per month. And thank you to all of you that have been supporting us all year long as we head into our third season on Michigan Podcast. Back here on Michigan Podcast, and now that I've laid out my 25 crystal ball predictions for the 2019 college football season, it is time to get a second opinion. Our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA and Ann Arbor and Wolverine Digest joins us here on MP. It's good to have you back for our Season 3 premiere, Michael, as we get back to weekly episodes. Go Blue. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, and that excites me that you're back in full swing, because it means that football season is getting a little bit closer. I don't do the countdown, but I know it's around 50 days until the first Michigan football game, and certainly that is incredibly exciting, especially considering the year that most people are predicting the Wolverines to have, and what this year holds. I mean, this is going to be a year that probably tells us one way or another what the Jim Harbaugh era is going to be. Is it going to be, is he capable of taking that step up and beating Ohio State and going to the Big Ten title game and being a college football playoff team? There's a golden opportunity, never a better opportunity in his 5 years than right now. And so we're going to learn a lot about this Michigan football program and its future in 2019.
At the time you and I are taping this, we are 45 days away from the first college football game of the year, Florida versus Miami on August the 24th. So, wow. It's just around the corner. All right, let's get started. Yeah. So you had a chance to review, before we went to air, you had a chance to review my Crystal Ball Top 25 predictions. And you've picked out the three that you think are the most prophetic, and then three that you think are the absolute cray-crayest. Since I, as you well know, am a man of low self-esteem, I want to begin with the good news first, because my ego needs a boost, all right? So here are the three that Michael Spath says he thinks are the most plausible. You like prediction number 5. After losing 4 games in a season only once, between 1969 and 2001, Nebraska will lose at least 4 games for the 16th straight season. And Michael, I mentioned before you came on, for those of us who can remember maybe the tail end of the Devaney era, certainly all of the Osborne era, the idea that Nebraska would lose 4 games or more 15 years in a row is nuts. Phil Steele thinks Nebraska is going to be in the Rose Bowl with Michigan in the playoff. I think they will be better and improved. I just think they've got another year of recruiting to do to ask them to do better than, say, 8-4. So you seem to agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a big fan of Scott Frost. I thought, similar to Michigan hiring Jim Harbaugh, I mean, that was the absolute right choice for that program. Not only is he an alum, but he's got a proven record. What he did at Central Florida to make them nationally relevant. It's a little bit akin to what Chris Peterson did at Boise State before he took the Washington job. I think he's a hell of a football coach. I think the way that he treats his quarterbacks in his offense gives them a chance to really elevate pretty quickly. When you look at this Nebraska team, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of when say Rich Rod took over for Lloyd Carr, and the roster had been gutted pretty significantly, and the upperclassmen, it wasn't like when Brady Hoke took over for Rich Rod, he had all those upperclassmen that were poised and ready to go. I think we saw a year ago that even a coach like Scott Frost could not overcome the limitations talent-wise that Nebraska had. And when you look at this Nebraska team, Adrian Martinez is special, and there's a couple of young players around him, but most of their best players are going to be second and first-year players. And I just think that's too much to overcome to be a 9, 10, 11-win team this year. Their schedule, they obviously they get to play in the West, but they do have a couple of decent crossover games in the East. I think Iowa, I think Northwestern. One of the ones that you threw out there, Minnesota. I think all those 3 teams are pretty well improved. I think Wisconsin, even though they're coming off a bad year, I don't expect them to be a 7-5, 7-6 team this year. So I think Nebraska 8-4 is a solid year for them. I think it's kind of a little bit too grandiose and too much just jumping for the Scott Frost hype to predict them to be a 10-win team this year. Not yet. They're another year away, as you said.
All right, my second prediction that you thought was the most prophetic is number 7. That Mark D'Antonio will retire from Michigan State at the end of the season, and the school will name Pittsburgh coach Pat Narduzzi as his replacement. And I gave 2 reasons for why I'm predicting this, Michael. Number 1, I thought the coaching reshuffling in the offseason and the way it was handled was a clue. The fact they brought in no new blood at all, meaning we're not really looking at a long-term situation or infusion of new perspectives here, that strikes me as a coach that kind of sees the light at the end of the tunnel and has loyal assistants with families that he doesn't want to leave them, in the lurch and throw them under the bus. And then number 2, if you look at their roster, their recruiting is really leveled off. I think the roster they have this year is good. I think they'll have maybe the best defensive front 7 maybe in the country, certainly in the Big Ten. I think that they can't be as bad on offense as they were a year ago, and they probably won't have nearly as many injuries. And the schedule for them, as much as you can have a favorable schedule in the Big Ten East, it's more favorable this year. I think they're kind of gearing up to make one more run, and that's why they kept the band together, and that this is the swan song. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think you make a great point about the offseason coaching moves. I mean, everybody was clamoring for some type of splash, bring in a innovative offensive coordinator like Michigan did with Josh Gaddis, and instead, Mark D'Antonio reshuffled the deck among current assistant coaches and didn't really go out there and say that he needed to fix anything. He has always been at his best when he had an incredibly good defense, which they are poised to do again in 2019, and then had a terrific upperclassman quarterback. And I'm with you. Lewerke, remember, flash backwards a year ago where we were ranking Brian Lewerke among the 2 or 3 best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Very high of him coming in off of his sophomore year. Thinking what he was capable of in 2019. And so he had a terrible year. He battled injuries. He lost his best wide receiver in the Michigan State game. He didn't get a lot of help at the running back position. But when you look at it, he's a veteran. He's lived through that. They've got some young wide receivers. Cody White is back. They feel better about their running game, where he's going to take, you're right, I think he's going to take one more stab at this. But the recruiting to me is where you can really start to see. I mean, they've always been a program that has relied on the 2 and the 3 stars and building these guys up. But I want to say that while I disagree with the whole notion that, the only reason Michigan State had success was because Michigan was down, I think that's unfair to Mark D'Antonio. What I do agree with is that right now in the Big Ten East, between Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State, you have 3 programs recruiting at an absolute elite level where all 3 are poised to finish at least in the top 15, but really in the top 12 to top 10 in the recruiting rankings. And that makes it that much harder for him to be successful. Now Maryland goes out and gets Mike Locksley, and he looks like a guy who can elevate that program a little bit. That's going to make things harder. Some of the Big Ten West, Nebraska's recruiting a little bit better. Minnesota's recruiting a little bit better. So he's just got far more competition, and there's a lot of programs in the Big Ten that are having greater success in the recruiting trail than Mark D'Antonio, and I just don't know that he can keep on with his formula and expect to compete for championships. And he's a little bit older. He's gone through some of the health stuff. He's gone through a lot of the off-field issues that they've had the last couple of years. I think it's just poised and ready. If he can finish top 3 in the Big Ten East this year, and a 9-3 type of season, maybe even a 10-2 if things break right for them, I don't know why he wouldn't step aside and kind of walk out on top of this Michigan State program and everything that he can be revered for in that capacity.
A lot of great points there, and I don't want to take anything away from what he's accomplished, because the best run Michigan State's had as a program since the heights of Biggie Munn and Duffy Daugherty long before you and I were born. But he largely did it at a time that Michigan was wandering in a decade-long wilderness. Penn State was digging out from the Sandusky scandal. Many of those great seasons, those dynamic recruiting programs weren't operating at full capacity. And then you mentioned 2 other schools there in terms of Nebraska and Minnesota, and I would throw Purdue in there. All all three have young, dynamic, recruiting head coaches that are also taking away the potential pool of talent. What does that look like? Well, it looks a little bit like this. If you're Michigan State, you've got Ohio is one of your prime recruiting territories. You're not going to beat Ohio State for too many young people in that state, but you were beating Michigan for the next tier of kids most of those years. Minnesota, Nebraska, those programs weren't even factors in that part of the prime recruiting territory. Penn State was trying to count how many scholarships it actually had, and now you went from getting the second team all-state guy in Ohio to getting like the second team all-regional conference guy in Ohio, and I think that is kind of quantifying a little bit of what you're describing, isn't it?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's far greater competition, not necessarily on the football field, although I think there is. I think there's just greater competition on the recruiting trail, and that makes your job so much more hard, so much more difficult. The other thing too to keep in mind is D'Antonio and Izzo are so close, and don't you get the feeling that Izzo is drawing near, and they probably had those conversations? Hey, how much longer do you want to stick with it? Michigan State basketball with Cassius Winston and Xavier Tillman coming back. I mean, they had a great chance this past year to win a national championship, and they'll have an even better chance potentially here in 2019-20. I think it could be a bold prediction for me, Steve, is to say that this is the final year for both D'Antonio and Izzo.
Well, this year for Michigan State basketball, I have plenty of time to talk about that. It reminds me of what they did, 20 years ago. In 1999, they got to the Final Four, lost in the semifinals, brought everybody back, including an All-American point guard. What'd they do last year? They lost in the national semifinals, bring almost everybody back, including an All-American point guard, and then the next year they won it all. And I could see if they did that again, I could see Tom Izzo kind of riding off into the sunset with that happening.
And think about at least where the program is. I mean, until we figure out if Juwan Howard has any coaching chops, I mean, Izzo could beat Michigan 2 more times this year. And if he goes to the semifinals, if he goes to the national championship, he could step aside and say, hey, I've won my last 5 games against Michigan and won 2 Big Ten titles in that span. I mean, that's a pretty way to bow out if you're Tom Izzo. And I think I don't expect D'Antonio to have the same type of success. I don't think he'll beat Ohio State this year. I don't think he'll beat Michigan this year. But if you finish the year 9-3, and again you're third in the Big Ten East, and you can kind of say like, hey, look, we've got this program back in a solid spot, and in Pat Narduzzi, you have a if not a great successor, you at least have someone that's been part of your program, that was a great defensive coordinator, that's been a head coach for a couple of years at Pitt. It makes a lot of sense.
My final prediction of the 3 that you liked the most, number 9, after losing 4 games or more, the 11th time the last 13 years, and it's shocking that Auburn has been that mediocre. Auburn will fire Gus Malzahn after the season and hire Liberty's Hugh Freeze as its next head coach, because the one thing Freeze has proven he knows how to do is beat Nick Saban in Alabama. And you'll recall in my crystal ball last year, Michael, you and I talked about this. One of my predictions was that either Art Briles or Hugh Freeze would be back as a college football head coach, and Hugh Freeze got hired by Liberty. So that was the other prediction that you liked the most.
Yeah, and when you talk about those 2 head coaches, I mean, what's this sounds awful, but Hugh Freeze is guilty of cheating. Art Briles is guilty essentially of covering up a massive sexual assault ring that was happening between his football team and the greater Waco area. So one of those guys to me is untouchable. The other one should be untouchable, but this is the SEC we're talking about, where there's no scruples, and Auburn is desperate. I mean, if you had the 1 year where you won a national championship with Cam Newton, and certainly Auburn has had a little bit of success against Alabama the last 5 or 6 years, but you've watched Alabama elevate itself, and now not only have you seen Alabama elevate itself, but you've seen you saw Clemson. It was supposed to be you, right? It was supposed to be you that ended up dethroning Alabama and dethroning Nick Saban. And instead it's been Dabo Swinney and Clemson that has dethroned Nick Saban. And it's got to be just driving Auburn fans crazy. I don't think they have much more patience for Gus Malzahn. I'm with you that if he doesn't win the SEC West and take down Alabama, I think they look for a new head coach. The part that I struggle with the most in this prediction was the idea of Hugh Freeze coming back. But again, if this is the SEC we're talking about, and I'm going to throw it out there, Cam Newton was bought. I'm not a big. I don't love doing the SEC cheating thing, but come on now, Cam Newton was bought, and if you're Auburn and you haven't had any issue in the past with going down that rabbit hole, why would you really care about going down that rabbit hole right now with Hugh Freeze? He had great success at Ole Miss. He clearly, one way or another, is a top-notch recruiter. So I think it does make some sense, and I think Auburn would gladly rejoice over this flip, bringing in getting rid of Malzahn and bringing in Hugh Freeze.
It's crazy that if you're an Auburn fan, basically if your kid's enrolled in kindergarten and are entering their senior year in high school, you have either seen your team either win a national championship or come one play away from winning another one, or finish with 4 losses or more every single year. That's nuts, because those other 2 years was the year they had the Cam Newton year where they won it all, and in 2013 when they were one last-minute play from Jameis Winston away from winning the last BCS national championship. The rest of those seasons, they were mediocre or under 500. That's incredible variance. All right. Enough with, hey, Steve, great job. Now, some accountability. Here are the predictions you think are nuts. Number 3, you think it's nuts that for the first time a 2-loss team will make the college football playoff. In fact, I think multiple 2-loss teams will be in contention for the final playoff spot. And I have noted that in 2017, Auburn was number 2 heading into the final weekend with 2 losses, but lost the SEC championship game. Otherwise, they would have been in. Ohio State that same year was the last team left out with 2 losses when Alabama was put in over them. And then in 2016, the final spot came down to 3 teams. 1 loss Washington, and then 2 loss Penn State and 2 loss Michigan. Those were the 3 teams in contention for the final spot in 2016. And so people act like this is never going to happen, but we've been close a couple of times to a 2-loss team getting in. So tell me why you think it's nuts.
Well, you just rattled them off all the 2-loss teams that have been there, but I don't know that any of those 2-loss teams, like if you use the year that Michigan was in the conversation, they lost to Ohio State and Iowa in 2016. I mean, were they really that close? I think you're talking about a Pac-12 champion Washington, a 1-loss team in Washington. It made more sense to bring in Washington. And when I look at it like this: is Alabama losing 2 football games this year? No. So they're in the college football playoff. Is Clemson losing 2 football games this year? No, they're in the college football playoff. Is Oklahoma losing 2 football games this year? Probably not. And the only way that they're not in the college football playoff is if somehow Texas, just raises its game. But even then, I don't see Oklahoma having 2 losses. So I think there's a pretty decent chance that right out of those 3 teams, you have 3 teams with 1 loss or fewer, and those 3 teams are in the college football playoff. Georgia or another SEC team, maybe that's what you're banking on, is one of those teams, they lose the second game, or they beat Alabama, or they beat they win the SEC championship, that they get in. I don't think the Big Ten this year, as good as Ohio State and Michigan could be, if Michigan has 2 losses on their schedule, if they lose to Notre Dame at home and say Wisconsin or Penn State on the road, I don't know, Steve. I just think it's going to be hard for the committee to put even a 2-loss Big Ten champion in when the Big Ten West is not that strong. I think there's 3 teams that are guaranteed to have fewer than 2 losses in Oklahoma, Clemson, and Alabama, and then you've got the rest of college football to produce 11-1 or a 12-0 team.
Okay. The second of my predictions that you think is the nuttiest, I think Minnesota will end one of the 3 longest championship droughts in major college football. It's them, Vanderbilt, and Iowa State are the longest teams that have suffered without giving their fans any kind of a championship in football. I think Minnesota is going to win the Big Ten West. You think this is nuts? Why?
Well, I mean, nuts to a degree. As I told you before we went on, I think all of your predictions are somewhat plausible. I certainly, the negative that I'm not a huge PJ Fleck fan. I don't know enough players on Minnesota. Normally I come into a year where I have a pretty good feel for 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 guys on a team. I couldn't name you 2 on Minnesota. And to me, that just says, like, well, they're not ready yet. They're not ready yet if they don't have some of those marquee players. At the same time, who would have predicted last year that Northwestern would win the Big Ten West and come out of that field? And so I could see
especially when they started 1-3 with a home loss to Akron, remember? Yeah.
Right. I think Iowa's the best team in the Big Ten West. I think
I agree with you.
Northwestern.
I agree with you that Iowa is the best team in the Big Ten West. That road schedule, Vladimir Putin put Iowa's road schedule together this year. That road schedule is a gauntlet. That's why I'm not picking Iowa.
I guess why I don't pick them to win is I have 3 teams, I think, in the Big Ten West that would be better than Minnesota, and you could maybe make the case for 4. I think Iowa will be better. I think Northwestern will be better, and I think you can make the case for Purdue being better than Minnesota this year, and maybe Wisconsin. And so it's hard for me to envision that they're gonna overcome 3 teams right now anyway that appear better to them, more talented than them, and just a better overall football team than them. But hey, as they say, that's why they play the games, and we'll see if this one is crazy or not in a couple of months, Steve.
And then my final prediction you want to take umbrage with is number 8, that Clay Helton will survive at USC, mainly because Urban Meyer will have no interest taking over that university until it figures out its administration. Now, I think USC is going to win 8 or 9 games. I think they'll be better. But I also think you've got a situation there with the president and the administration with the college admissions scandal there. Now you've got a football coach that is suing Lynn Swann and the university, saying he reported recruiting violations, but they fired him for it. I just think that's a lot of drama for a guy that kind of likes to pick his spots like Phil Jackson used to, if you know what I'm saying. So that's why I think Clay Helton survives. He wins just enough, and Urban Meyer says, get yourself together first. But you disagree.
Yeah, the reason I disagree is you're right about the one thing. He had a really good AD down in Florida. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but we talked to him after Michigan hired Greg Madison. He had a great, I put that in quotations, AD and Gene Smith at Ohio State that had his back. He was in his corner. So I can understand why it makes sense to go to USC is a couple of things. One is, he has cherry-picked the best programs in college football. And what other program in 2 years' time, if you say he doesn't go right now, in 2 years' time has an opening? I think Notre Dame has reached the point where they're past the Brian Kelly speculation, so he's not going anywhere.
Florida State.
Miami has a brand new. Yeah, maybe. I mean, that'd be pretty early to fire Willie Taggart after, will that be 2 years, maybe 3 years? So that's a possibility, but I don't know that Florida State honestly even makes as much sense as, I don't really think of them as a blue blood. It's not Texas, it's not Oklahoma. I think USC makes too much sense. And when you look at the Pac-12, it's the easiest conference in college football. You go to Florida State and you have to contend with Clemson. You have to contend with Dabo Swinney. When he went to Ohio State, he wasn't contending with a Michigan power. He was contending with Rich Rod and Brady Hoke. I mean, that wasn't anything to be feared. He likes to go to places where he can kind of swoop in. Even when he went to Florida, it was before Nick Saban arrived in Alabama. I mean, and if you look at USC, who is the threat in the Pac-12? Stanford, they got the 9-win threshold. Chris Peterson up at Washington. Yeah, he's a good coach, but Washington has some history, but it's not the greatest place to recruit to. UCLA is continually is a dumpster fire. I mean, there's just no major threat to him. I don't think he can pass on the opportunity if it presents itself, and I think it will present itself because Clay Helton just isn't a good enough football coach, and the expectations out in Southern Cal are higher than 9 wins, higher than 10 wins. I mean, they should have been. If you had a great coach at USC the last couple of years, they're probably in 3 college football playoffs because the Pac-12 is so weak, and he could have just steamrolled through that. Gone 12-0 or 11-1, had the name of USC, and gone to the college football playoff. They've wasted a beautiful opportunity these last couple of years, and they just can't keep doing that.
That's some interesting analysis there for sure. Appreciate the feedback, Michael. Thank you for joining us here in the Season 3 premiere episode for Michigan Podcast. We'll talk to you soon, brother. Go Blue.
Yeah, it was. You did a great job with these predictions, Steve, and I hope later on this week we'll bring you on Inside the Huddle on WTKA and talk about a couple more of them because they're really interesting, and I think we could have an entire show dedicated to going through some of these. So I look forward to that, and football is getting closer and closer. Going to enjoy the summer, although not the sports scene, but really excited about football season here in just a couple of months.
Amen. Talk to you soon, Michael. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hey, if you want to keep up with what we think about Michigan athletics all week long in between episodes of Michigan Podcast, check out our website at wolverinedigest.com. For example, we've got a brand new story up there looking at all of the potential starting fives in the Big Ten now that Franz Wagner's in the fold for the Wolverines, and you can see where Michigan stacks up against the rest of the conference. There's ways to keep up with our coverage of the football team, basketball. We've added hockey and baseball as well. So a ton of stuff that you can follow along with here. And we have a video each and every morning we put up as a way of just saying kind of good morning and catching you up on whatever the big news was from overnight for the Michigan Wolverines. So you can follow us on the website, Recruiting 2, at wolverinedigest.com. This week's Twitter poll, we asked, will the Big Ten be left out of the college football playoff this season for a third year in a row? 61% of you said no. 39% of you said yes. Now, some of you might be confused and say, hey, wait, the Big Ten champion's been left out 3 years in a row already. That's true. The Big Ten's champion in 2016, Penn State, Ohio State, and in 2017 and 18 did not make the playoff. However, in 2016, Ohio State did get in as an at-large berth, if you will, albeit with a regrettable and forgettable performance, getting shut out by Clemson. That's why a lot of people don't remember it, because they didn't make much of an impact. But this would be, if they don't make it this year, it would be 3 years in a row, no Big Ten team in the college football playoff, despite the fact a lot of people think Big Ten football right now in the conference is as good and as deep as it has been since the late 1990s or early 2000s, going back a good 15 years or so. This week's question of the week comes from Sam, who says Jim Harbaugh only has 4 losses at the Big House since he's been the coach at Michigan, but all 4 were to Ohio State and Michigan State. We play both of them at the Big House this season. Does that concern you? Yeah. I mean, for all the great things Jim has done here, we are 1-9 against top 10 teams. 4 of those games we lost as outright favorites, including 2 at the end of last year. We were favored against both Ohio State and Florida. So, yeah. Now, as an analyst, I take off my fan hat, put on the analyst hat, and the analyst in me looks at the numbers and the data and likes the situation and the schedule that Michigan's in. I take the analyst hat on, I put the fan cap back on, and I'm a nervous wreck right now, Sam. Thank you for ruining what's left of my summer. Hey, thank you for tuning in here to the season premiere of Season 3 of Michigan Podcast. We are back to regular order and weekly episodes next week, right before Big Ten Media Days. We will give you the full measure of the rest of our college football preview as we conclude our forecast of 2019. Looking forward to it. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube, the podcast platform of your choice, whether it's a like, a subscribe, a 5-star review, whatever is relevant to the platform you access us from, the more attaboys and helmet stickers that you could give us along those lines, the better it is to help us grow and get the word out about what we do here at Michigan Podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Check us out online at wolverinedigest.com. And a special thank you to our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping to spread the word about what we do here each week as well. Until next week, go Blue.